president's physicians. This is breaking news just in. They say that they met with the president today in the residence, and he had a, quote, restful first night at home, is reporting no symptoms. Vital signs and physical exam remain stable with an ambulatory oxygen saturation level of 95 to 97%. Overall, he continues to do extremely well. I will provide updates as we know more, and this comes from Sean Conley. Of course, vital signs, etc., without any specifics, but that is the latest from Sean Conley. Peter Alexander is with us now. We're just looking at this very bare bones report on the president's first night at home.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Andrea. And what remains to be seen is whether we'll have another opportunity to press Dr. Sean Conley for better clarity on some of these things. Certainly a dose of transparency, but a lot of questions remain unanswered. One of them, obviously, as it relates to the president's x-rays, one of the things that you can't do here at the White House, what the lung scans showed in terms of any COVID-related effects or perhaps pneumonia to his lungs. I was struck by what you were just reading there, the ambulatory oxygen saturation level of 95 to 97%. I'm not a doctor, but in the conversations we've had with Dr. John Torres and others in our team, they said they like the number to be 96 or above. So the fact that at some point it was at 95, I think is something that some in the medical community will look at right now. But notably, it says that the president had no significant symptoms at this point. As we get more information, of course, we'll share it with you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube.
Folks, Joe here. Like I say all the time, we're in the battle for the soul of this nation, and I want...
But this issue of the president himself downplaying the virus as he's fighting it, I know that was a topic of conversation for you today with Dr. Fauci.
It was, and it was a lengthy conversation, Chuck. This was actually part of a Cornell University event that I agreed to do where I interviewed Dr. Fauci. It's their homecoming week. Look, I asked him, obviously, about many things. I asked him about the president's behavior and the messaging that happened at the White House last night when the president removed his mask. Dr. Fauci being very careful to say that he would not directly take on the president or criticize the president, but he did say, look, there are some things that should be universally practiced. Masks, avoiding crowds, distance, outdoors, washing hands, doesn't matter who you are. And then I did ask him directly about the comments that you just mentioned. The president this morning comparing COVID-19 to the flu and appearing to diminish it and say that it's not that serious. And here's what Dr. Fauci said in response.
COVID-19 is a serious situation. It is a viral disease that has a broad range of manifestations with the potential to make people very ill and kill them. The numbers speak for themselves. We have 210,000 deaths and over 7 million infections in the United States and over 1 million deaths globally. So this is not a trivial disease. People in the United States should realize that it is not a trivial disease. The potential for what COVID can do, what SARS coronavirus 2 can do, is very, very much different from influenza. You don't get a pandemic that kills 1 million people, and it isn't even over yet with influenza.
So Dr. Fauci very strongly saying this is not just like the flu. Chuck, we also talked about the news today that the FDA may be getting reportedly some pressure from the White House in terms of putting out regulations and guidelines for vaccine makers and how long it could take for a vaccine to come around. Dr. Fauci saying that he supports the FDA and those new guidelines that the FDA wants to make sure that on average, people who get the vaccine in trials then spend about 2 months, at least a median amount of the people spend 2 months being ill.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching
Imagine that you are General Mark Milley, the highest-ranking officer in the United States Armed Forces, and the chair.
Breaking news, though, within just the last few minutes here, NBC News confirming yet another person in contact with the president has also tested positive for the coronavirus. My colleague Peter Alexander is back with me from the White House. Peter, what's up?
Yeah, Hallie, a source familiar with this matter confirms to me that this past weekend, a military aide, one of those valets who comes in contact with President Trump, tested positive for coronavirus. So this would mark, by our count, at least the 15th person with some connection to this White House or this president who is now tested positive. It follows that news just yesterday that the press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, had tested positive, as well as 2 of her communication staffers. And remember, it's not the first time that we've learned about a military aide, one of those valets, testing positive. A matter of months ago, we first reported on NBC News that a military aide, one of the individuals who even provided the food service to the president, had tested positive as well. So that information just confirmed by NBC News. We're working to get more details on whether anybody else has been affected. But I can tell you what's going on behind the scenes in the West Wing right now. For the pool of reporters today, they came in and they were able to get their Abbott lab test, their sort of rapid test today. There was nothing on the president's public schedule, but those tests continue as planned. And they're also allowing some reporters who were here last week when Kayleigh McEnany last publicly briefed to get tests as well. Obviously, there are a lot of reporters who want the opportunity to get tests right now, given the fact we know of at least 3 White House reporters who have now tested positive. Allie?
And so, Peter, that brings the total number of people connected to the White House or Trump campaign infected with COVID to 15, if my numbers are right. Check me on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think the number is now 15.
Okay.
Thank you for checking out our YouTube channel. Why don't you subscribe?
Dr. Robert Redfield was totally misquoted in the media on a statement about the fall season and the virus. Totally misquoted.
You were accurately quoted, correct?
I'm accurately quoted in the Washington Post.
What Dr. Redfield clearly was asking for, just like we ask for every American to follow the guidelines. He's saying, please add to that guidelines getting your flu shot and making sure you're protected.
There's a good chance that COVID will not come back.
We don't know.
COVID comes back, it's in a very small confined area that we put out.
Well, the great thing is we'll be able to find it earlier this time.
And it might not come back at all, Jeff. It may not come back at all. He's talking about a worst-case scenario where you have a big flu and you have some corona. But it's all possible. It's also possible it doesn't come back at all.
We will have coronavirus in the fall. I am convinced of that. There will be coronavirus in the fall.
It's unbelievable. Donald Trump repeatedly going against what all of the medical experts are saying. It was going to come back in the fall. He kept lying to the American people, knowing it would. In fact, it never went away. It didn't go away in April. And he got it in the fall.
Well, it's the fall now, 5 months after that briefing. And President Trump yesterday returned to the White House infected with coronavirus and struggling to breathe. He's now apparently going back to his talking points from the spring. This morning, tweeting, flu season is coming up. Many people every year, sometimes over 100,000, and despite the vaccine, die from the flu. Are we going to close down our country? No. We have learned to live with it, just like we're learning to live with COVID and most populations far less lethal. We remind people of what the president said to Bob Woodward on February 7th about the virus.
It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. This is more deadly. This is 5 per... this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff.
This is deadly stuff. Donald Trump admitted deadlier than the flu, 5 times deadlier than the flu. Donald Trump told Bob Woodward in February. And Willie, he lied in the spring, he lied in the summer, he's lying in the fall.
Lied every step of the way.
Lying this morning while his doctor says he's still not out of the woods yet with the coronavirus. And remember, again, Herman Cain died several weeks after he was first infected with COVID. So the idea that this president's acting like he's immune from a disease, a deadly disease he still has, is sheer insanity, and the voters all know it. It's why he's getting crushed in the polls.
I always wanted to play it down. Another quote that the president gave to Bob Woodward. That's what he's doing here, except now We have him on tape showing that he understands how deadly and how serious this disease is. So now he's trying to tweet this morning to downplay it. By the way, this is the exact same argument he was making back in early March. He sent out a nearly identical tweet, although the numbers he put out were different, on March the 9th, where he said, well, we have the flu and it kills a bunch of people every year and we don't shut down our society. He's saying that today, in early October, 7 months later, after 211,000 people have died and people's lives have been forever changed, and kids aren't back to school. It's outrageous, and he's sitting here with coronavirus, and we all have the knowledge that he knows how serious it is because of the Woodward tapes. You put all that together, it's just another stunning tweet from this president, but we know he's making stuff up. We know he's seriously ill, and we know now, maybe to the extent we didn't know back in March when he was trying to make this case, how deadly serious COVID-19 is.
Well, Willie, as we've talked about in terms of other issues that might have been shocking, you know, getting dirt on a political rival from a foreign country, the list goes on. That type of thing didn't impact working Americans' day-to-day lives, but COVID-19 does. It has killed 211,424 people so far. That's the count that we know about. Here's what Trump voters, Trump supporters are seeing now. That Trump said this virus would go away. The president now has coronavirus himself. Top members of his White House has the coronavirus. This president has held super spreader events across the country for months now, and every city he goes to, 2 weeks later, they get a pop in coronavirus cases. When he held the Tulsa event, he squished people together, including Herman Cain, maskless, in the audience. We don't know where Herman Cain got it, but he died from it, okay? And now he is known as the president who held a super spreader event at his White House. And at least 8 people are now infected with the virus. That's where Trump voters stand with their truth now. That's one thing they can understand, because that virus can come knocking at their door too, and they know it.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you...
Fundraising deadline coming up for Senate Democrats. They need your help right now if they're going to.
Bring in our medical experts, former White House advisor for health policy and vice provost for global initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, who's an NBC News and MSNBC senior medical contributor. Also with us, former senior FDA official, Dr. Michelle McMurray. She is the president and CEO of Biotechnology Innovation Organization. Look forward to hearing from you. But first, Zeke Emanuel, your thoughts on the president leaving the hospital when his doctors, who aren't saying much and aren't revealing much, but they do say he is not out of the woods.
Well, he's definitely not out of the woods. I mean, there are many, many, many cases of where patients look good, look like they're doing better, look like they're recovering, and then they crash. The sort of immune response overtakes. They either have blood clots or they end up with breathing problems. And so this is way too early, and the president is... the most irresponsible act was taking that mask off. We know that he's spewing virus out still, and he really, really couldn't care about what he's doing to anyone else. He demonstrated that last Thursday in New Jersey. He demonstrated that in the car visiting his supporters, and he demonstrated it yesterday when he ascended the stairs and took that mask off. Just totally irresponsible behavior for someone who's infectious.
Dr. McMurray, Heath will let you address what you saw from the president yesterday and last night, but I'm also interested in your take on there being no contact tracing from the White House from the Supreme Court event of 10 days ago. The CDC has a team ready to do that contact tracing. The White House, reportedly from the New York Times this morning, has cut out the CDC and said, we're only going to contact trace 2 days before the president's positive diagnosis. In other words, you have this group that we know at the Supreme Court event has contracted all these cases as a super spreader event. Is there any defense, is there any justification from where you sit for the White House not conducting a massive contact tracing operation off that Supreme Court event at the White House?
Well, what's been made incredibly clear this week is that you cannot stop the virus by cutting out the science. You have to be responsible and follow the scientific guidelines. The CDC has been clear. It's not enough to test. You have to wear PPE, at least wear masks. You have to socially distance. You have to limit mass gatherings. And you have to trace contacts. I compare what's happening at that Rose Garden event this week with the call I got from Taiwan last week, showing that to date, despite their 21 million people, they're just reaching their 500th case of COVID in the whole country. And they've been fighting this even longer than we have in the U.S. If you do the right things, if you follow the right scientific measures, you can combat the virus, but you can't do it with hope alone.
That's been obvious to almost everyone except the president since well before March, actually, including from his own coronavirus task force. Bob Costa, how is the White House explaining, how is the White House defending not performing a contact tracing operation off the Supreme Court event where we know all those cases came from?
As a reporter on the White House beat, it's not so much about what the White House is doing anymore, Willie. It's about what President Trump is doing. The White House is reacting to President Trump. From Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to lower-level aides across the communication shop to different people in agencies, it's the president driving the entire conversation, not only publicly with these images and videos, but privately inside the White House. Some of his aides wished he would stay at Walter Reed, not only so he could recover to help the campaign eventually at full speed, but it's the president's desire to return to the campaign, to go back to battling Vice President Biden, that's shaping every decision that's being made. The president being his own advisor, and that's something we've seen since day one.
Casey? Dr. Manuel, just to pick up on that, in terms of the president going back to the campaign trail, what do we know about, and I realize his doctors have been incredibly not forthcoming, so it's a little hard to say, but can you just walk us through the progression of this disease, what we know about how it moves at this phase? I mean, there are people I know who are struggling with the effects of this weeks, months later. Do we think it's really possible that the president will be at the kind of strength that one would need to be in the last 28 or so days of a presidential campaign at any point in those 4 weeks?
No symptoms. They don't even know they have COVID. That's obviously not the president. He's been fatigued. He's had fever. Looks like he's short of breath. But some people do bounce back quickly. But I totally agree with you, Casey, which is 60% of people don't bounce back, aren't asymptomatic, and there is a very long tail. The other thing I would say is you really have to wonder about the president driving this, given the fact that he's on dexamethasone, and we know that there are some well-documented effects on mental clarity, aggression, agitation, confusion, and COVID itself has a sort of mental fog, it's been called, slow cognition, not feeling like you're actually tracking things, and you wonder how much the president's judgment here is being affected either by the medication, by the disease, and that actually is a problem. And taking off the mask once he ascended to the Truman balcony is one of those questions. It's like, where's the judgment here? Is something going wrong? It's quite worrisome. So, you can't tell, and we don't know, how good his lung function is, what his viral load is, how much antibody he has, things that I'm sure they've tested him for, but repeatedly don't reveal. They only reveal the good news and then say HIPAA prevents me from revealing the bad information. That's baloney, and it leaves us with a picture where we really don't know how sick he is and the actual effects of everything.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories, and you can click
one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. Together.
Well, these are adversaries whose principal goal is to undermine the strength of the United States. Russia's primary goal is to United States. And when they now see a situation where the President of the United States is ill and somewhat incapacitated as a result of that, there's no question in my mind that they are going to look for opportunities to take advantage of that. That's what adversaries are all about. And that's why it's extremely important to send a clear signal to the world that the President and his staff are fully in charge of the responsibilities not only to deal with domestic issues, but to deal with our national security issues. Those signals ought to be clear, and they ought to be sent now.
That's former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta speaking with Andrea Mitchell yesterday. And joining us now, former CIA Director John Brennan, who's a senior national security and intelligence analyst for NBC News and the author of the new book, Undaunted, My Fight Against America's Enemies at Home and Abroad. Director Brennan, good morning. It's good to have you with us. We'll talk about the book in just a moment, but I want to just jump off what Secretary Panetta was saying there. And as someone who was around, as someone who served in the Obama administration during the H1N1 crisis, obviously we didn't reach these levels with that. But what are your concerns right now in this moment when you have a president who is sick about what the world is thinking?
Well, good morning, Willie. Well, we all wish Donald Trump a speedy and full recovery, because I do believe the American people deserve to see Donald Trump resoundingly defeated in next month's election. But I am concerned about a couple of things. One is the reported side effects of the medications that he's been on. Dr. Manuel was pointing out just earlier that confusion, aggression, impulsiveness are some of those side effects. And the last thing we need is for a Donald Trump to be more confused, more aggressive, more impulsive than he already has been. Secondly, I think there is great distraction and preoccupation right now in the White House as far as Donald Trump's health as well as the White House staff's health. And so their ability to respond quickly to any type of crisis, whether it be domestic or foreign, I think is rather questionable. And third, I think a lot of foreign adversaries, as Leon rightly pointed out, are looking for signs that, in fact, they could take advantage of the situation right now. Might Russia, Vladimir Putin, decide to do something in Belarus, or China decide to do something in Hong Kong or the South China Sea, knowing that the national security hierarchy is, in fact, distracted as a result of this health crisis that we are facing.
So you laid out a couple of scenarios. You led me to my next question is what are some places where Russia or an adversary might look to move? We know that Russia is obviously ongoing and was in 2016 again now looking to interfere in our election process. Does this sickness from the president, does that change that dynamic at all?
Well, I think it might, even though Donald Trump has turned a blind eye to a lot of these aggressive moves on the part of Vladimir Putin, or as well as concerns about things that are going on around the world, that Donald Trump has his own sort of agenda. But it's not just Donald Trump's health. We see that a number of senators have been, felled by this virus, as well as other members of the White House staff. And so, again, what happens if there's a terrorist attack abroad? And there needs to be, again, a very quick and focused response and reaction to that. So I'm just concerned that, as Leon Panetta said, we need to have a very much in-command national security structure at the very helm of our government. And if Donald Trump is, in fact, being waylaid by this illness, we are, in fact, more vulnerable to being surprised and, by our adversaries as they seek to take advantage of the situation.
You've got a new piece up on NBC Think where you write about the Obama administration, which you served in its handling of the H1N1 crisis. It goes without saying that the Obama administration handled that differently than the Trump administration has handled the COVID-19 crisis. Of course, the Obama administration left behind an explicit pandemic playbook, which was ignored by this White House. But what are the signs that you looked for in the Obama administration in those early days?
It's just a quarter, right? But what if Acorns automatically invested that quarter?
It was doing a good job handling this, if you believe it was.
Well, Barack Obama, like all the other presidents I served, had tremendous respect and confidence in our medical experts, our scientists. And he really wanted us to understand what the information that they were providing us really indicated. as far as what policy choices we should make. And so one of the things that he insisted on is let the policy be driven by the data, by the expertise. Do not try to shape, the perception of the American public that will mislead them about the seriousness of it. But the H1N1 pandemic in 2009 was not nearly as serious as this COVID-19 virus is. But yet there was still very much a complicated systems engineering challenge that we had to bring together the experts, the scientists, the private sector, the state and local governments with the federal government. But again, Barack Obama was insistent that we carry out our duties without any regard for giving him praise or pointing to facts that really were not factual at all. And so there was quite a distinction between how President Obama handled that crisis and how Donald Trump, unfortunately, is mishandling this one.
Mr. Brennan, I just have to ask, given the fact that the president does seem rather unstable, just by the acts that we saw unfold in the past 24 hours, leaving the hospital, it appears he is leaving against doctors' wishes, although the doctors sort of passed over that carefully and said he's not out of the woods and he's going to be in a safe situation. Then we saw him walking around breathing all over people with no mask, which seems to lead me to believe that he's exhibiting extremely bad judgment right now. If you read about the drugs that he's on, they do appear to have some pretty significant side effects. And I wonder, is there any type of measure in place if the people around him feel that he is acting so erratic that perhaps he's unfit to lead?
Well, I agree with you that Donald Trump's, I think, already poor judgment is more impaired as a result of his medical situation and the drugs that he is on. The 25th Amendment does allow, and there's a legal basis for the Vice President and the majority of the Cabinet to for the Vice President to assume the duties of the office of the presidency. But Donald Trump can contest that. So although the 25th Amendment provides a legal basis for that, it's unclear exactly what constitutes a president's inability to discharge their duties and who actually makes that determination. And at this point, I don't think the vice president and the cabinet have any interest in trying to seize power from him. But the longer that Donald Trump continues to exhibit, I think, this increasingly strange and even bizarre behavior, I think there is real questions about whether or not we are being led by somebody who, in fact, is going to be undermined by his own medical condition, the drugs that he is on, and therefore our national security, our domestic security, could be at risk as a result of his, I think, abuse of, quite frankly, the duties of his office. If in fact he is unable to carry them out, I believe that he should turn over those duties to the vice president, or the vice president of the cabinet should in fact insist on the transfer.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay.
Those comments come, though, as the New York Times is reporting, the White House is distribution. Trump claimed that coronavirus vaccines will be available momentarily. Those comments come, though, as the New York Times is reporting, the White House is blocking strict new federal guidelines for vaccine usage and distribution. NBC News has not independently confirmed this reporting, but the guidelines call for checking on adverse reactions for at least 2 months after phase 3 trials are completed, meaning the vaccine would not be available momentarily or for widespread delivery until after the election at the very earliest. Dr. Peter Hotez is back with us from the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development. I want to sort through this. What are you hearing from your FDA sources as to whether the Times reporting is correct and that the FDA proposed guideline is being shot down by the White House?
Yeah, it would be terrible if it's true. I mean, what the FDA wants to do is, one, they want to add 2 months to the timeline after all of the human volunteers have received 2 doses of the vaccine. And the reason is these are brand new technologies. They've never been licensed before. So all of the 3 Operation Warp Speed vaccines now in phase 3 trials in the U.S. The Moderna, the Pfizer, those are both 2 mRNA vaccines. The AstraZeneca, Oxford's an adenovirus vaccine. These are brand new technologies, never been licensed for. So the FDA wants to put in some belts and suspenders to make certain that there's no untoward safety signal that happens. And 2 months is a very reasonable thing to do. The other thing the FDA wants is to not only see if the vaccine protects against a mild disease, but also severe disease. And that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, we don't want to be protected against the mild disease. We want to be protected against going to the hospital or going into the ICU. So all reasonable guidelines the FDA wants to do. And then the New York Times quoted Meadows, the chief of staff from the White House, is saying that Stephen Hahn, the FDA commissioner, is being, quote, overly influenced by the career FDA scientists. Well, heck, that's what Stephen Hahn is paid to do, to be influenced by the career FDA scientists. That's exactly what we want. These are some of the best vaccine scientists the world has ever seen. I've worked with them for 20 years at the FDA. They're tough. They're super smart. They've seen everything, and this is the reason why the U.S. has an unparalleled record of producing vaccines that are both safe and effective. So, again, the language and the optics coming out of the White House, to me, looks terrible, and to me it looks like they're willing to compromise public safety for political expediency. I don't know that for a fact. I can only base it on what I'm reading in the New York Times.
Well, the last time I interviewed Dr. Fauci a week or two ago, and he reassured us that there are independent outside committees that oversee what the FDA authorizes, and that the FDA can't authorize the release of a vaccine until those committees on something that's experimental have approved it. But it sounds as though, from what I've been reading, not just today, but in the run-up to this, that the White House was, and the president said he was not happy with the comments from Stephen Hahn and wanted to get into it. Yes.
That's right. There are two committees. There's VRBPAC, which is an FDA committee, and there's ACIP, which is linked to the Centers for Disease Control. Again, extraordinary track record of ensuring that our vaccines are both safe and effective. You know, I don't know all the legalities, but my understanding is that not so much the White House, but the Health and Human Services Secretary, in this case Secretary Azar, does have the ability to override decisions made by the FDA, but he would be very foolish to try to do that, given the track record and safety. Why would you try to undermine that? So hopefully this won't happen. Hopefully our scientific community can hold the line, but we'll see how things go. It's still a few weeks up to the election.
Well, you're a very important voice in all of this, so thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate it, Dr. Hotez.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
Someone who knows what it's like to work in the West Wing and in the Trump administration. Joe Grogan is the former Domestic Policy Council Director for the Trump White House. And Joe, we invited you on because you can give us sort of a firsthand, I think, description of just how, A, tight the quarters are, and B, sort of how dangerous it is to duck this virus if it is running around the West Wing. So paint the visual for us, if you will, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an old complex. Construction began in the 18th century. It is not designed for the amount of people that occupy it, the tempo of people that are coming in and out, and it isn't set up with modern air circulation systems. During the Obama administration, they had a plan to shut it down for 2 years and upgrade all the air circulation, the security of the West Wing and the White House, and they were going to move President Obama's office into the Executive Office building, which is adjacent, and that plan was scrapped. So President Trump came in, and one of the first trips that he did as president, he went up and stayed at Bedminster, and a partial upgrade was begun at that point. But I think it's important to understand, anybody working in the West Wing is basically in varying degree ill the entire time they're working there. There are colds, there is the flu, people are taking decongestants, they are on top of one another all the time. Senior aides are always telling young people who deem themselves invincible, go home if you don't feel well. I mean, none of the young people, certainly none of the assistants want to miss anything important or miss a day at work, but you are constantly pushing people to go home and you're on top of one another. I would say too, I just watching that disinfecting of the press room, I mean, that is, to be frank, a weakness that was identified at the beginning of COVID. One thing that we discussed, I was on the task force, is we should not allow the media onto the complex. There were reporters coming down from New York City and New York when that was a hot spot, and we didn't think it was smart. We did not have the testing set up at that point to be able to screen everybody who was going to be in these briefings or be on the complex and come into the Oval, and the president rejected that course of action. You start to make compromises on the security complex in little ways like that, and then eventually it unravels.
Yeah.